Welcome to Damn Good Movie Memories with your host, Brian Davis. This podcast is the cure for your long commute and super boring workday. Hey there, it's Brian Davis, and for this week's episode, we're going to cover the movie The Setup from 1949. The studio was RKO Radio Pictures. Release date was March 29th, 1949. The running time, 72 minutes, and was in black and white. Leonard Maltin from his classic movie guide gives it 3.5 out of 4 stars. He writes, gutsy account of a washed-up fighter refusing to give up or go crooked. Robert Ryan has never been better. Now, I discovered The Setup when I bought a film noir box set in the early 2000s. I love the darkness and the realism of the film, and I was impressed by the cinematography during the fight scenes. This was a surprising gem that I was lucky enough to get, and I really miss those box sets that aren't released as much today by the studios. Okay, let's get into the making of the film. So Robert Wise was still early on in his film career as a director, as his first film was in 1944, and he had directed 8 prior to The Setup. Now, I covered his 1947 film Born to Kill in episode 259. Wise loved the script to The Setup, which was based on a 1928 poem by Joseph Moncure March. Now, the main difference between the poem and the script is that the poem's protagonist was a black fighter. March later saw the film and was incredibly disappointed that his story was not kept in its true form as intended. Hollywood, much like the world at the time, wasn't going to have a black person as the main character of a feature film. The only parts of the poem that matched the film were the fight scenes. March was paid $1,000 by RKO for his rights to the poem. That would be the equivalent of $12,000 today. Now, RKO claimed they didn't have any black actors under contract, even though James Edwards does appear in the film as boxer Luther Hawkins. But the simple fact was that RKO felt they would lose money in the South, which was still under Jim Crow laws, which meant segregation for whites and blacks. Director Martin Scorsese first saw The Setup during a film class in college. The professor chose the film because it was unique due to its real-time portrayal. If you watch the film and pay attention to the clocks, all the timing matches the length of the film you're watching. Scorsese was definitely influenced by the fight scenes in The Setup when he directed Raging Bull in 1980. Scorsese actually showed the film to the cast for the film The Aviator, which he directed in 2004. Now, Robert Ryan was already under contract to RKO, so his casting was a setup, pun completely intended. He was cast before any of the other actors were cast. Ryan was actually a boxer in college at Dartmouth and was a heavyweight champ for his 4 years there. Ryan also lettered in football and track. Audrey Totter was still early in her career, which began in 1945. I've actually covered 3 of her films on this podcast, which feature her, including The Lady in the Lake, The Unsuspected, and The Postman Always Rings Twice. Okay, let's get into the film. So it opens outside of the Paradise City Arena, where some of the audience is milling about before the fight begins. One of the fighters on the card is Stoker Thompson, that's Robert Ryan. He's an over-the-hill, washed-up fighter, because he's 35 after all, and he's staying at a hotel across the street from the arena and getting some rest before his fight. Unbeknownst to Stoker, his shady manager Tiny, played by George Tobias, is already putting the fix in for the fight, meaning that Stoker is to take a dive. Tiny assumes there's no way Stoker can break his losing streak, so it's a sure thing that he'll lose. So Tiny makes a deal with a local mobster, ensuring that Stoker loses. The other reason Tiny doesn't tell Stoker is because he doesn't want to cut him in on the deal. What a great guy that Tiny is. Also in Stoker's hotel room is his wife Julie, played by Audrey Totter, who is tired of seeing Stoker take constant beatings night after night.
It's getting kind of late.
Everything's packed.
Well, let's get going, then. Come on. What's the matter?
I ain't going tonight, Bill. I got a headache.
Well, they gave me a good seat for you. Row 4, section C.
I told you, Bill, I got a headache. I'll be here when you get back.
Julie, you always go.
Don't you understand, Bill? I don't want to go no more. After Middletown the other night,
Oh, that was different. I was off at Middletown.
Oh, 2 hours after the fight, you still didn't know who I was.
Look, Julie, I can take this kid like I told you. I can feel it. If I can belt him solid just once,
And what'll he be doing in the meantime?
Oh, you don't understand.
I understand that he's 23 and you're 35, Bill. 35 in this business, you're an old man.
Look, Julie, they're building this kid up, feeding him a lot of pushovers. If I can get over him tonight, that'll mean a rematch. That's a semi-windup, 150 guarantee. Maybe a top spot even.
Top spot?
Yeah, top spot. And I'm just one punch away.
I remember the first time you told me that. You were just one punch away from the title shot then. Don't you see, Bill? You'll always be just one punch away. Oh, Bill, it ain't I want to hurt you, but... Oh, what kind of a life is this? Springfield, Middletown, Unionville, Paradise City? How many more beatings do you have to take?
Yeah, but if I get a top spot again, we'll get $500, maybe 6.
Bill, it's been good a long time between us. I want to keep what we've got.
Don't you see what we could do with $500? I could get a piece of Tony Martinez. Best looking middleweight I've seen since Harry Greb. I'll train him myself. Or we could get a beer joint. Maybe that cigar stand I told you about in Union City.
I don't care about Martinez or cigar stands or anything else. It makes no difference to me if you go back to the docks or drive a garbage truck or go on relief even.
Julie.
Well, it's better than having you with your brains knocked out, Bill. It's better than having you dead.
Stop it, Julie. Stop it.
Oh, Bill. Maybe you can go on taking the beatings I can't.
Well, that's the way it is. You're a fighter. You gotta fight. Here's your ticket. You can do what you want.
Stoker, upset by what Julie said, walks over to the arena to get ready for his fight. Stoker decides to catch a glimpse of one of the fights before his. It's in this scene we actually get the overview of what type of person goes to these fights. Some just love the brutality of it and are rooting for as much back and forth pummeling as possible. One man in the crowd is blind and has his friend give a play-by-play account of the fight. One woman in the crowd almost seems aroused by the boxers punching each other. Another guy has a transistor radio and is listening to a baseball game while watching the fight. One obese guy just gorges himself with food the entire time. Stoker, almost disgusted by the crowd, saunters to the locker room. Now, the locker room is an interesting place as all of the fighters share the same room, which isn't very large. One kid is getting ready for his first fight. His robe even has his high school's name on it. He ends up throwing up when he hears about the gory details from one of the fighters who just finished his bout. One guy named Gunboat is so punchy he barely knows where he is. But once it's fight time, it's like second nature to him, and his instincts kick in. Now, these aren't highly ranked fighters. These are guys just starting out, or never were, or simply have no other way of making a living at this point in their life. However, all the fighters have dreams of one great fight, which gives them their chance for a title shot. It's all fantasy, of course. It's a bleak look at the fight game.
What good's that gonna do you?
Never can tell. Might show me the way.
To beat Lopez?
No.
Oh, I get it. The way to go to heaven.
You don't even think there might be a heaven?
How do you know there is?
I don't know about you, Nicky. But me, I'm a gambling man. I play percentages. I say there's a price on everything. Even heaven.
You're punchy.
It's a short ender, sure. The odds are 1,000,000 to 1. Hey, a guy'd be a sucker not to take them kind of odds, huh?
Are you kidding? Using the Bible for a scratch sheet?
This ain't a scratch sheet, Mickey. This is the future book.
How do you like that guy? Making book on a hereafter.
Well, I don't know. Everybody makes book on something.
Back at the hotel, Julie gets restless waiting for Stoker's fight to finish and decides to go to the arena. However, as she is about to enter, she hears the roar of the crowd and she freezes. She then turns around quickly and decides to walk the streets instead. However, she passes a newsstand and hears the radio broadcasting the fight. She thinks it's Stoker, knocked out again, but is relieved to hear it's not him. It was actually Gunboat who was knocked out in the second round. Julie continues to walk around before tearing up her ticket and throwing the shreds down towards the street while gazing out near an overpass. And back at the locker room, the boxers look on horrified as the doctors try to revive Gunboat. He does eventually come to, but he's a mess. No matter how many times these guys see the gruesome aftermath of these fights, they aren't jaded to the potential of their own mortality one day. Finally, it's time for Stoker's match, who has no idea that his own manager Tiny and his ring guy Red, played by Percy Helton, bet against him with a mobster named Little Boy, played by Alan Baxter. He also confirms that Julie didn't show up to the fight when he looks out to the crowd where her seat should be. Stoker is confident he'll win, while his opponent Tiger Nelson has been given instructions to not knock out Stoker until the second round.
Now remember, stay away from him. Try to slug with him and he'll murder you.
I know what to do.
That's right, Stoke. Relax. Fight your own fight.
Remember now, take it easy for 2 heats. Then you can finish. That's the setup.
Okay, Danny, okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, the next and final bout of the evening, 4 rounds. In this corner, at 194 pounds, in purple trunks, Stoker Thompson.
Hey, Pop, where's your wheelchair?
And in this corner, at 198 3/4 pounds, in white trunks, that promising young heavyweight from Middletown, Tiger Nelson.
Don't hurt him, Nelson. He's an old man.
Okay, men, you know the rules. I want a nice, clean fight. No heel, no rabbit punching, no gouging. Break when I tell you to break. Go to the neutral corner and all knockdowns and keep them by the belt. Any questions? All right, the customers came to see a good fight. Shake hands now. Come out, fight. May the best man win.
Don't bend, Pop. You'll never get up.
Don't forget, stay away from him.
Okay, the fight starts, so what will happen? While Stoker's on a losing streak and will likely lose the fight on its own, what will happen if he just gets lucky and beats Tiger Nelson? Without him even realizing it, his life could be in danger because of his shady manager. You're just going to have to watch the final 30 minutes to find out. I will say that the fight scenes, while not like modern film, are not bad to watch either. The cinematography is very well done, and the ending isn't as predictable as you might think. While this might seem like a B-movie without a lot to it, it's a great, realistic look at the fight game in the 1940s. This isn't supposed to be a Rocky or a glamorous depiction of an underdog who finally gets his shot. This is an everyday fighter who simply wants to win one fight to keep going. The film also gives the other side where the spouse takes as many beatings as her husband, not physically, but emotionally. The film also gives a good look at how disgusting people are when it comes to boxers. They aren't humans. They're simply treated as meat to pound on one another for entertainment purposes. I think the setup is definitely worth your time, so check it out. Plus, it's only 72 minutes in length. It never wears out its welcome. All right, some fun facts. So Robert Wise originally believed Joan Blondell would play the role of Julie. However, RK owner Howard Hughes wasn't impressed with Blondell, particularly her looks, and said she looks like she was shot out of the wrong end of a cannon. Oh boy. So Hughes bought RKO Studios in 1948 and shut all of the productions down, putting a halt to this film when it was approaching its start date. Wise recalls, all I wanted to do was to get that picture made and then get out of my contract with RKO. I did get the chance to make the picture, they didn't pick up my option, and then I escaped. The setup was a box office and critical success and actually won Best Cinematography at the Cannes Film Festival in 1949. Robert Wise credited screenwriter Art Cohn, who was a former sports writer, with much of the picture's realism. Cohn knew a thing or two about boxing, and many of the script's colorful supporting actors, such as the blind man, who had the fight described to him, came from his own San Francisco experiences. After attending several fights, Wise actually added other characters himself, including the sports nut who listens to the ball game on the radio during the brawl. Wise used 3 cameras to capture the boxing scenes, one capable of seeing the entire ring, one focused on the fighters, and a handheld for quick shots and close-ups. One person who's really starting to get into boxing films, and that's Lindsay. And so she definitely has never seen the setup before. I don't think most of my audience has. So we get her fresh take, probably your fresh take too, on this film. So let's hear that now. And then I'll be back next week to talk about yet another random film from my DVD collection. Okay, welcome back. And one thing that's never a setup is bringing Lindsay to the podcast because she loves doing this podcast.
Hey, everybody. Hey, Brian. I do love doing this podcast. Thanks for having me back on.
All right, so I don't know. Let's see. I showed you Rocky, the original Rocky, about a year ago, and you really liked it. So did you like boxing movies before I started showing you boxing films?
I mean, my dad growing up wasn't a sports guy. The only things we watched together were all of the amazing pay-per-view boxing fights of the 1990s. So absolutely, we watched a lot of boxing in my house when I was young, and WWF. In the Hulk Hogan, Roddy Piper, all those years.
What boxing match do you remember the most watching?
Oh my gosh, like all the Tyson fights.
So he would buy the pay-per-views?
Oh yeah.
Would he buy the Holyfield?
Yes,
yeah.
I saw the ear.
He saw the ear.
Oh yeah.
What did your dad think when he saw that? Was he like, what the...
It's funny. I wish I could remember what I thought he thought. I just know this was the one thing that he liked watching, and I can imagine if he were still here today, he'd probably be a huge MMA fan. My God, he himself could have probably been a good MMA fighter. But I think, there was excitement to the sport, and it was very physical, and it was very mental. It was a very mental sport. People think of boxing as being like, okay, the physical stamina and whatever, but a lot of it is about having the mental wherewithal to keep going and to know how to kind of anticipate certain things. And so I don't know. I would like to think that maybe other than just, the punching and the potential cuts, I would like to think that might be a reason he was so interested in boxing.
Well, look, Muhammad Ali was a genius. I think he was probably the most cerebral, until, of course, the bitter end, of boxing. I mean, look what he did to George Foreman and the rope-a-dope. I mean, it became that, but he knew he could essentially have George Foreman punch himself out just by wearing himself out, by trying to just keep hitting Ali. But Ali was kind of, he was getting hit, but he wasn't getting hit, squarely. Mm-hmm. And then he waited, and when Foreman didn't have anything left because he was tired, and then just went to work on him. So
outsmart your opponent.
That's right. So what about boxing do you actually like? Because is it just because you grew up with your dad liking it, or do you actually like watching? And do you think now boxing is kind of almost obsolete? It's now MMA. So
MMA, there's a lot more kind of like gore and stuff to me with that. Like, I don't know when
it's almost like the original Gladiator.
Yeah, when I think back to boxing, I feel like, I'm not saying this is the case, but I feel like it's a little more of the gentleman's agreement about how to do it, whereas MMA is about, the air quotes gloves coming off and almost making like not everything, but almost everything, on the table.
There's almost less rules.
Yeah. I don't know. I think looking back, some of it was the pay-per-view experience itself. Like, it was a big deal to order those fights. They were $50. And in like the 80s, that was a lot of money for that. Yeah. Not everybody would do it or be able to do it.
And usually it was definitely not worth it, especially with Tyson, because he'd be done in...
he'd be 45 seconds, 35 seconds.
Which actually, not to cut you off, but that's what's really interesting about this movie. So it's 4 rounds, but it seems like the rounds are like 5 plus minutes.
Forever.
So I don't know if that was by design. Maybe they were longer because there was less rounds, but they were the rounds themselves felt longer.
Those guys also weren't the size, the physical size of the guys who were boxing, in the 80s when I was watching. Like, obviously the Mike Tysons, Evander Holyfields, Lennox Lewis, they were much bigger and much bulkier and moved slower but hit harder. These guys were like constantly like moving all the time, whereas when I remember watching
like Sugar Ray Leonard, he's like a middleweight.
But I remember the heavyweights, moving contemplatively, like they weren't necessarily zipping around that ring all the time because they were saving their energy and being smart for when they needed to use it. But I don't know. I think part of it was something to do with my dad. There's certainly an appeal to me when I think back to being interested in boxing and why I might have been. That's a piece of it, something to do with my dad. And also, there was just something so kind of glamorous about the Vegas scene and the boxing and like the intros into the ring. And in Atlantic City. I didn't live too far from there. And then like the hype, like the weigh-ins and the getting in each other's faces and it felt like a soap opera. And it was funny.
Well, that's what wrestling is.
Yeah, I guess what's so interesting to me is when I look back and I think about the drama in sports, it's not that dissimilar to many other sort of dramas we see on TV. It's just, do you follow it or not? Not a lot of women are interested in sports now, but there were times when that was less the case. And when that was the case, it's like, I would know, like, oh God, I'm not going to get involved in that. I can't figure that out. But if you allowed yourself to figure it out, like when I first started following football, you realize it's as much a drama as anything else.
I will say that the original reality show is live sports. That became before anything else.
It is. So maybe there's another aspect of the draw for me that's around the excitement and the build up and the drama of it, because it does feel pretty dramatic. But you're right. There are times when, certainly back in the 80s when I was watching these fights, they were over before they began. There'd be a knockout like super fast and you're like, okay, that was it.
Well, that's why those Holyfield Tyson fights were so great, because they did go longer. Holyfield was a master in not just getting knocked out, but he could stick around. All right, specifically about this movie, I actually thought the boxing was pretty good for the 1940s. And as I told you, Robert Ryan actually boxed in college at Dartmouth. He was a heavyweight champion. So this actually, it almost looked like they were hitting each other. Like, it didn't look like they were shadow boxing.
No, it looked pretty legitimate. And he obviously had some clear boxing skills. If he hadn't boxed before, which clearly he did, and clearly he was good. But if he hadn't, he must have spent time studying it, if not, because it was obvious that this person knew, what they were doing, and they were moving like a boxer, and they were sort of experiencing how I would imagine them measuring their endurance and their stamina and deciding, whether or not they're going to stay in it or they're going to, kind of stay down, if you will. So, he certainly was skilled at the craft. And I also thought, this was a bit of a surprise for this time period. You never know what to expect from some of these films. I really don't. But this one was well done.
The other interesting thing is this film is actually deeper than you think. It's only 72 minutes, but there's a lot going on. There's the inevitable problem when age, and when you get to the age of, do I want to do this profession anymore? In sports, you're done when a lot of people aren't even quote unquote middle-aged yet. He is, I believe, 35 or 36, so he's well past his prime.
He's like a dinosaur in
boxing. And what was interesting in the locker room before the fight, everyone thinks that all they need is that one fight, that one knockout, and all of a sudden they're going to be the top ranked. And it's kind of this weird delusion that they have to keep going. But the one that suffers the most is the spouse, if you are married to the Audrey Totter character, who just wants him to retire. She'd be happy if he runs a cigar stand or a restaurant or something like that, but he doesn't want to give it up.
Yeah, I'm sure there's like a champion's heart in there somewhere who's looking to win, even though, like, technically in the boxing world he'd be considered past his prime.
Sure.
But I think what blew my mind is these guys weren't making money. It's one thing to be Mike Tyson, Evander Holyfield, Lennox Lewis,
this is small
Muhammad
time.
Ali or whatever.
Yeah.
This, or Sugar Ray, this is not that. They don't have a purse of like $14 to $20 million.
And most guys aren't going to be making the most of them are like this guy.
These guys were like, you know what they remind me of? I'm not even joking. Like cage fighting stuff before like MMA, like back alley, like basement type fights where they're not sanctioned, and you're lucky if you walk away with $500. Back then I can't even imagine how much money they were making, but it certainly didn't seem like a lot. When the guys who were supposedly wanting to fight Throne said they had paid the people in his camp.
What, $30?
To do it, $50.
He got 50. The cut guy, I think he said it was a Finn, which I believe is $5.
Oh my God. It's unconscionable to imagine the strain and the strife. Like, the only reason I think, when I look at former boxers or football players or people who put their body through like intense, crazy abuse essentially for an extended period of time, the only reason I can imagine they do it, other than the ego part, which is got to be in the people that are sort of pursuing these careers, but is the money and the security.
But there is no money.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. It's as if
they'd be making more money being a fry cook.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's as if they're pursuing it for the love of whatever, but the sacrifice they're making, if it's juice not worth the squeeze, it's like the sacrifice they're making is such a detriment and not at all financially viable. It seems a little dumb.
Well, and this movie doesn't pull any punches. This is definitely not a glamorous side, so you get that point of it.
It's gritty.
You get what most guys used to call punchy, which means you were basically...
CTE.
Yeah, you had so many concussions that you were no longer mentally...
No, you're repeating yourself. You're kind of soft at that point.
Yeah, and so Gunboat, that character... I mean, he would kind of get up to the fight, but he didn't know where he was. He kept thinking he was, he's
probably going to barely make it to like 40.
And he kept repeating 21, which is one guy that had like 21 chances to become like heavyweight champion or something like that.
It's sad. Like it's actually kind of sad. I mean,
and what else can he do?
Yeah, and that's the thing. At that point, and it makes me think about some of the football players today. I mean, I know they have better protection. I know there's different rules. I understand all these things. But, I mean, they're taking an incredible amount of hits. And even with protection and even with helmets and even with all the training and the whatever and the concussion protocols, I mean, they're still taking these hits. They mount up to something.
Well, think about it. When a pro goes pro, let's say they go pro at 22. They've already been taking hits and abuse for 10 years.
For 10 years at that point.
And it only gets more intense as you get older because
now you're playing with the best guys.
That's right. So by the time you are 35, I don't care how much money. And I think that's why you're seeing more and more football players retire and not play like 15 years anymore.
I don't blame them.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to be a quarterback because they don't. We're going down a tangent. You even touch it. You breathe on the quarterback, we're all going to get a penalty. But back in the day, I mean, these guys were really just getting mangled. So
I mean, I don't blame them. Do their work, do your good job, take your money,
get out,
walk away. Because the idea is you're setting yourself up. I don't know if I'd say generational wealth, depending on the person, but basically you're setting yourself and your immediate family up for a good success for the rest of your own lives and leave while you're ahead.
Live off your interest.
Right. Quit while you're ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Obviously, we're not going to give away things because the outcome is very interesting. I think depending on if you've seen enough films or not, you might not see this one coming. So there are multiple outcomes to this film. So did you see any of them coming?
I guess I didn't. I guess I didn't know what was going to happen because I kind of didn't, and again, not giving anything away.
Yeah.
I guess I kind of didn't realize if it was even a big deal what he was doing. Like what was happening. I didn't even know if that was going to be a problem or not. Like, I didn't know. It seemed like there were some shady people involved in this business, as one would expect. Like
everyone, yeah.
And I guess maybe I didn't anticipate it. I don't know if there's parts of the outcome that I think are good.
Mm-hmm.
There's parts of the outcome I think are bad. I think that for me, maybe it's a bit of a positive and a negative outcome.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's...
Well, I think the ultimate outcome of the movie is great. I think it's without being campy, without being cheesy, because it answers a lot of questions without, I think, being predictable.
But also it's rough. There's a roughness to it.
Yeah, which I think this movie shouldn't go a certain way. Like
it's certainly gritty. I mean,
and I think it ends that way too, but it's still satisfying, if that makes sense.
I guess it is because there's maybe some redemption in
Yeah.
in it. And again, I don't want to say what it is.
No. You should see this movie. I'm talking about the audience because it's a quick movie. It's not that much longer than a TV episode. I mean, and it doesn't feel quick. Like it's well paced, and really, if you like boxing, I think the boxing.
It's a good boxing film.
Yeah, I mean, it really does look like they're hitting.
Absolutely legit. Oh,
Yeah.
all that sweat, yucky.
But
But again, super legit looking.
one more thing, the director does an amazing job looking at kind of how despicable not the fighters are. The fighters are actually probably the most honorable people in this entire movie.
They were.
The friggin' audience,
they're the worst.
Fans, I guess they're fans, but they just want blood. They want guys to kill each other. I seriously
Even
don't.
old ladies.
They want to bat an eye if someone died right there.
They're like old ladies
yeah,
screaming.
and having the blind guy there that's having it read to. And at one point he goes like, "Yeah, like hit his eyes, you know." And then
crazy.
you know, there's one guy. All he does is eat the whole time. He's just and everyone's sweaty and smoking and gross.
It's gross. Yeah.
So
I would rather. Oh god.
I think that's another great.
I'd rather be anywhere else but in there.
Kind of a narrative that the most honorable people are actually guys fighting. The rest of the people are actually worse.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that.
Yeah. So you would recommend this film?
I think it's worth watching. I mean, I definitely think it's got a realism to it and a grit. I think the acting is pretty good. I mean, the fighting scenes are actually really well done. And again, I think you can tell that Robert Ryan had the experience that he did, because when you watch him, it kind of shows through, which is great. You're watching a guy who had a pretty stellar collegiate boxing career, extend that to his acting chops.
It's also worth mentioning that usually, and you haven't seen a lot of films, but usually Ryan plays either the villain or the heavy. And this is one of the few films where, he's not a bad guy. He's actually I'd say
he's the good guy.
Yeah.
In this,
he usually doesn't play a good guy, so it's really interesting.
He was a good guy in this, and I think he was a really sympathetic character.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
No, I did. I mean, sometimes films from this era, like I said, I like to watch more of them because, this is a time period where I'm just like less familiar. I really don't know as much about more classic film, or even like this more unknown films from this time period. And it's kind of interesting to see how they did things. And some of the plots are better stitched together and better buttoned up than others, again, because as you like to point out many times, and I need to remind myself, people didn't think these films would live in perpetuity. They thought they showed them once and they were gone and that was it. And that's not how it is now. You could rewatch everything forever.
Yeah.
And never, never, never. So, yeah, this one, I think from start to finish, it moved well. And like you said, 72 minutes, but it never really dragged. And you do kind of have anticipation for what's going to happen. And geez, the fight scenes seem like they went on forever, but not in a bad way. I'm just saying, like, they really...
No, you wonder, because usually you watch, like, Rocky, or you watch...
Yeah,
the rounds are super quick, or they fast forward montages. In this case, you're like, wow,
I think you watched all of it.
Yeah, this is, like, a really long... And I don't know, I'd have to go... I should have done some research, but maybe in these... Because it used to be, like, 12 to 15 rounds was, like, an actual heavyweight fight. But maybe for these 4-round fights, the actual rounds were longer.
I don't know, but they sure as heck seem like they went on for a long time. I can tell you that. I was like, half the time when they're in their scenes, I'm like, where is the bell? I don't know how much of a break there was between and how long the rounds went, but it sure seemed like it took a long time. But I would overall say that this is a film that's worth putting on the watch list. Check it out. See what you think. Like, is it my favorite film of all time? No, but I don't have anything negative to say about it. And actually, I think it was well done. So, yeah. I think if you're interested in sports films and, if that's an interesting thing to you and if you like boxing or sort of these sports dramas in a way, like this one fits the bill.
So I'm going to wrap up on this because I'm doing some quick research. So before they did actual boxing glove boxings, they did bare knuckle boxing.
Oh yeah.
And this is in the 1800s.
That's brutal.
There was no limit of the rounds.
Oh my God.
And so the matches would be fought to a conclusion. Basically, someone knocked out or tapped out. And there was a match
in 1833 that lasted 3.5 hours.
Oh my God.
Could you imagine?
Did the people live afterwards?
Well, that's the thing. So then they started passing rules and laws because otherwise
sure hope so.
some big guy would get killed. So one of the most famous early boxers was John L. Sullivan, and that's when he started boxing with gloves.
Wow,
but yeah,
good development.
I almost think that this was probably just movies because even in the Rocky movies, they box 15 rounds, but in most heavyweight fights are now 12. Yeah. So
that's sort of what I knew him to be.
Yeah. But check out the film.
Yeah, I think it's worth it. I mean, it's definitely an interesting take on that time period. And again, I just can't get over the fact that these guys were putting themselves at risk every single night, and they really weren't being compensated fairly for that. That is really sort of stunning. Most of them seemed quite destitute, actually. Mm-hmm. It almost felt like a desperate thing to do because it was like, well, this is what they've been doing, and this is the only way they're going to make their money. It was kind of tough to see that aspect of this was tough.
So if you think your job sucks, it could always be worse.
Yes, it could.
If you enjoy this podcast and are an iTunes user, please do the show a favor and head on over to the official iTunes page for Damn Good Movie Memories. Be sure to leave a rating and a review. This will allow the show to appear higher in the algorithm and spread the joy of this podcast to the masses. If you are not an iTunes user, you can still listen and subscribe on Podbean at damngoodmoviememories.podbean.com. Be sure to like us on Facebook under our Damn Good Movie Memories page. You can also listen to a limited number of episodes on YouTube. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode, and be sure to tune in next week for an all-new episode of Damn Good Movie Memories.